Ready and excited. And if you look at the base of the screen, it still climbs until, and so I just kind of wait till it stops.
Yeah.
So those of you who are joining us, thank you so much. I know that you all can hear us. We're just going to wait a few more minutes as people file in and get us ready, and we'll get started. All right, we think we'll hold with that, and I know that maybe some will come along. Oh, people are still joining, another batch. Okay. Well, let's get started. We are so grateful to have you with us, Bishop Perry. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful way for us to talk with you before going into Holy Week. And also, we were all looking forward to having you with us for Easter Day, Evensong, which is truly a beautiful experience. So thank you for making time during an incredibly busy time. Before I go any further, would you please open us in prayer?
Sure. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Ever living, ever loving God, in the midst of this time, in the midst of the crisis, may you fill our hearts with courage and compassion, and may you ground us so that we may remember that you're with us, and may you enliven us so that we may have the faith, the hope, and the ability to look and to wait for what is to come, all the while being very aware of the holy now. In your blessed name, we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for those of you who are joining us. I am so excited to have you all with us, and we're going to get to some questions that Bishop can interact with. This is the final class of a class that I've been teaching all through Lent called Practicing Resurrection. I know some of you have registered for that class and have been following it. And last week we finished with Matthew's depiction of the resurrection, which is connected to an incredible moment, the seismos, the earthquake, the unbelievable breaking forth of the kingdom of God in time and space. And Bishop Perry has had to hit the ground running as our new bishop. And I know that I speak for many, many clergy and many, many laity when I say that we're just in awe of her incredible leadership during this time. It's been compassionate. It's been prayerful. It's been surprise, both anxious because it's authentic, but at the same time, incredibly trustworthy. And it's been such a privilege to be with her at the beginning of her tenure as bishop, and to watch her work in this way. This is not an easy time for anybody, again, for anybody who's new. But the purpose of this this class tonight and this meeting tonight is whenever anybody's in a crisis, we tend to only see one slice of them, even if that slice is amazing and wonderful. And my hope tonight is to actually step back and take a breath and see the whole person that is Bishop Perry, and to get to know a little bit of her story in her own words. Many of you I know have read articles about her and are excited about her story. Many of you know of her incredible ministry in Chicago and the revitalization of the parish that she did over 27 years. Is that right? But we wanted to kind of step back and just allow Bishop Perry to present herself as the whole person in Christ that she is. And so thank you for being with us, and we'll get to your questions. Yes, it's so great to have you. So the first question we have is, what three mementos can you share with us that tell us a little bit of a story about who you are?
Yeah. And thank you for prompting me with that question ahead of time, because I don't necessarily have these mementos loaded up, but I picked three. The first one is a photo of my mom, Mary Jane. And I don't know if you can put that up, Bill. My mom, Mary Jane, um, Mary Jane Fahey Perry. Hi, Mom. Died 3 years ago, March 23rd, and she's a nurse, and she was someone who was fierce. She was so compassionate, so generous. Could bear a grudge, particularly if you went after her kids. My father has kind of rewritten some of her history, and I'm like, no, she actually had a pretty good way of bearing a grudge. But because she was just fiercely protective of the people she loved. And the thing about my mom is my mom, anytime I'd be worried about something, Bill, I'd be chatting with Mom, and she'd say, "All right, honey, I'll say a novena, and it's gonna be okay." Very Irish Catholic family, and my mom's piety was so grounded in her reality, and
Mm.
and so I hold that as someone who, and oh my goodness, could she cook? Um, and 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 I really miss her.
Mm.
I really miss her. And I know that she would have been so excited with me being elected, and the ordination and consecration. I'm also kind of, don't get this the wrong way, I'm glad she's not here for this virus. She died when she was 79, but she had bad lungs. She had COPD. Never smoked, but she had stuff as a kid, and so she would have been fragile in this.
Mm.
And so I'm relieved I don't have to worry about her.
Mm.
But she is, oh my goodness, is she? I aspire to her faithfulness.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's my first memento. My
And
Yep, go ahead.
yeah, let me just get that off, and I'll put this the second one. Is that another picture?
Yeah, we got another picture, because I'm better with pictures than I am with things. And so this is a photo, before you put it up, Bill, it's a photo of me in the Isle of Skye, which is one of the Inner Hebrides, on the west coast of Scotland. And it's me in a kayak, and it is me on a day when the winds were going about 40 knots. So that's about 43 miles an hour. And I was at a training session for the British Canoe Union to learn how to be a leader in advanced tidal waters. And so we'll show that photo. Um, and I have a yellow helmet on. That's how you can find me. There you go. There's my helmet. And there's the water over me. And the deal was to try to go through this slot as the waves were coming in and the wind was playing against and the tide was going the other way. And for me, one, it was this training for this aspiration I had to become a 5-star paddler, a leader in advanced tidal waters. I became the 4th woman in North America to achieve that goal.
Wow.
The only woman who, at that point, who didn't own a kayaking business, and I lived in the Midwest and had a pretty serious day job. But for me, it is about knowing limits and knowing skills and the combination of understanding. So acceptance, this is my definition of spirituality, actually, Bill.
Mm.
Acceptance, because water will always will out. So there is this acceptance about what's going on in our world and in our life that we cannot control. There is that agency that we have, the gifts and skills God's given us to do amazing, cool things. And my ability in a boat, I'm pretty good in a boat. I've got the ability to make it move, particularly if I understand what the water's doing and I'm not trying to work against the water. And awe. And that to me are the three ingredients of spirituality. And this awe of what God has created in this world, this awe of Jesus, the Son of God, coming into the world and knowing us. So that picture for me is an embodiment of both my spirituality and a tenacity to try to achieve something that was highly unlikely.
You know, and I used to actually whitewater kayak, and I did some sea kayaking. And so reading that water and reading your boat is hard for me not to do. And I don't want to, you know, bore people to tears, but is that, I'm guessing is that a race where you have two tidal currents hitting each other and then creating that wave?
It's a little, yeah, actually it is. It's a very small one though, because it's just a little scary.
Yeah.
So it's very small, but the tide is going in the direction of my boat.
Yeah.
That is pointed, and the swell and the wind is coming. Well, the swell is coming in the opposite direction.
So that's almost like the eddy out of which you're coming out of is like, or this, I guess I guess that would be.
I'm not in the eddy. I'm in the full.
Yeah.
And actually, I never got through it. The whole point was the waves kept crashing, and the exercise was to hold your position.
And that's where you got your bracing right there. Yes.
I am bracing. Yeah. Although a forward paddle, I always like to remember this, and you would know this, Bill, a forward stroke is better than a brace.
Yeah.
So moving.
That's a
paddle in the water.
That's amazing. That's a one. And the way you're pointing the boat, you've definitely got the right idea in that picture, because the boat is well positioned. It's going right into the wave, yep. Which says a lot about you too. You've got it, because that's actually going straight into it is the most efficient way to actually work with the water.
Yeah. And because it's a 17-foot long boat, and now we are getting off into.
Yeah, we'll stop after this. Yeah. But
17-foot long boat. So positioning it straight on is super important. Otherwise it's just going to get knocked all over the place.
It's amazing.
Straight on to the current and to the wave, not straight through the passage.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for indulging me. And I do want to ask follow-up questions about your mom, but I want to make sure you get through your mementos. And then for those of you who are joining us, if you go down to the base of your screen, you're going to see Q&A. And what you can do is you can just press on that button, and then you can actually type in a question, and we'll get to those in a little bit of time. But what you can do is write that question, and then Meredith Skoronsky, who's here as our kind of host manager of this project, of this webinar, she will be keeping in touch with that. And also, some of you are saying some wonderful things in the chat column. We're not going to be monitoring your chat column as much as the Q&A. And then we've turned off the raising hand option, because there are 77 of you right now, with perhaps more joining us. And it's trying to pick, the person who's raising their hands with 78 people will be just crazy. So third memento.
My third memento is my favorite, in addition to scripture in the Book of Common Prayer. But my favorite piece of literature is John Irving's A Prayer for Owen Meany.
Unbelievable, yes.
And this book came out early 90s, late 80s, and it tells the story of this really tiny guy who has this as a young kid, in this very John Irving weird kind of way. he has this sense that he's been called by God to do something amazing. And so, for whatever reason, he practices this one repetition of moves throughout his life, until it turns out that he is able to do that. And the book, I read it right. I read it right before I was ordained to the diaconate.
Wow.
But he's got the quotes in the flyleaf. One is from Philippians. The other's from Fred Buechner, also a Union Theological Seminary grad, an amazing writer. And the other one is from Leon Bloy, who I have no idea who the heck Leon Bloy is. But the Leon's quote is this: "Any Christian who is not a hero is a pig."
Wow, that's memorable. Yes. That's
And here's the thing that I would have people read this in a leadership class that I would teach at Seabury Western in Bexley Seabury. And for me, it's this: I think that we are all made in God's image and likeness, and that we have amazing gifts and talents that are unique to us, and that God is calling us to use in various situations. And that I think we need to go for it. And to say that, by heaven, I can, by being who I am and who God is calling me to be, I can, and we can together do amazing things.
I love that. That's a great, I mean, and then, my favorite part of that novel is the hymn, "Crown him with many crowns," that it's just is, which I've never quite gotten, but I get it. I mean, yeah, it's a beautiful hymn. It's a beautiful, thank you so much for that. I do, there is can we thread back to some of the mementos that you've done? So one of the questions that comes is from a parishioner that recently moved here from New Jersey. His name is Joe Lavilla, and he says, "Given your mother's devout Catholicism, how did you come to be an Episcopalian?"
Yeah, let's qualify that too, shall we? My mother and my father, and going way back, all of their devout Irish Catholicism.
Yeah, which is not fooling around, and that, yes.
No. And I mean, the other three last names in my family are Fahey, Flanagan, and Clancy.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
they're Irish people. Let's put it this way: when I came out as a lesbian, that was easier than leaving church. And when I flew home to come out to my parents, my mother said, and this was not long after I had been received into the Anglican communion, and my mom said, "We love you dearly, and we always will, but you've made us question absolutely everything we held dear, and quite frankly, we wish you would stop."
Wow.
But it was funny, and I just burst out laughing, and she burst out laughing. And my parents, and my dad's still alive, was at my consecration. He was a very happy man. My parents were always very, very clear that they would always support me in doing whatever I wanted. And there were points in their life where they questioned it, but they always supported me. And they knew I had an idea that I was probably gay, and leaving the Catholic Church, particularly going to the Church of England, was not easy for them.
Well, particularly for Irish Catholics. I mean, of all the churches to join, the Anglican Church is like, wow, really?
And it was hard for me too. But what my parents understood is that I felt a very strong call to ordain ministry, to sacramental ministry, and to preach. And it was my sense, and their sense as well, that if I stayed in the Roman Church, I would always be second string. And I didn't want to not fulfill what I felt was my call. Now, that said, my mother, I went to a Jesuit school, the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass. And my mom used to blame the Jesuits for my downslide into Protestantism.
Well, they do that work well when they do it. Let's just put it that way. Um,
But she was so proud, and my dad is so proud. Um, so it was, they learned, right? And the day after I got ordained, the night before, my dad said, well, Mary Jane, well, we have to go to mass. And my mom said, oh, for God's sakes, Ray, we went to 3 hours. With the ordination was 2.5 hours. And now we're gonna go to her 8 o'clock service and her 9 o'clock service and 11 o'clock service. She said 5.5 hours at church isn't enough church. I don't know what the hell is. And he's like, oh, okay.
and was he a lifelong, was his career in the Marines?
Yeah, he's a retired lieutenant colonel.
Wow.
So yeah, and that very much shaped and formed me.
Did you move around a lot as a kid?
I did. I stopped moving after I was 16 because Dad got a tour with headquarters, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Then he went to headquarters Marine Corps, and in between that, he went to Iwakuni, Japan. He went unaccompanied because the Marines frequently go unaccompanied. So, and then he retired. So, but I was in 3 different second grades. My dad was in Vietnam.
No kidding.
He was a communications guy, but he would send tapes back to us, and he would read books to my brother and I on the tape. And he read My Friend Flicka to us. And I remember him doing that, and then sort of bombs coming over and him sort of interrupting the reading and then going back to it.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. And he also, where in the United States did you primarily grow up? Did you have any time abroad?
No, the Marines don't tend to go abroad.
Yeah.
When they do, they send the person who's in the service, and they
Yeah.
usually accompanied. But I was born in San Diego at Balboa Naval Hospital. Then we went to Virginia. Then we went to Long Island while Dad went to Vietnam. Then we went to Hawaii for 4 years, which was super formative for me.
Wow.
And then back to Virginia. And then I went to college in New England, and then went back out to California and the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and then came back to New York for seminary at Union Theological.
Wow. Wow. That's beautiful. And your mom, she was a nurse as well. And that did mean, I don't want to, but what, in terms of her calling, in terms of her, I mean, both of your families, both of your parents were incredibly focused on service.
Yeah, I mean, I think my mom was super practical and super compassionate. And so I think that was just an amazing merger of those 2 ingredients to create her vocation. And I think that notion, and Dad was very clear about serving our country. And to this day, I still stand at attention for the Marine Corps hymn, and of course the national anthem. And yeah, that was very much in our family. We serve, and faith. I mean, every week we were at mass, and Dad was a lector, and he started the choir at one of the churches we were at, the ukulele choir, which
Excellent.
I did, and that was very bad. And my gift for music is as bad as my father's, but he argued with the bishop so that he could have it because he thought the kids would find it more engaging.
That's amazing. I actually did stumble in on a ukulele choir once in a coffee shop, and it really is a sight to see. It's amazing. It was not hypnotic, but it was quite there. We have a couple of one follow-up question, which I think is really important. And it's from Pastor Manisha. And she said, I'm moved by your willingness to share your grief about your mother even after 3 years.
Yeah.
Could you share the importance of mourning out loud? And then she adds, her mother died a year ago, which we both of her parents. And one of the great privileges, I think, is to walk with Manisha. She so faithfully walked through that mourning of her mom and dad, and while she's been with us. And so, could you say a little bit more about the role of grieving out loud, which is key?
I mean, I think grief is cumulative, right? And so my hunch is, and so that one piles on top of the other, um, and it's not near as acute as it once was, but I would say, Manisha, and to other folks, you might be feeling this. Um, that the anniversary of my mom's death was March 23rd, right? And let's think about what's been happening since what I like to think March 12th is kind of when I woke up and everything shifted for me in the midst of this pandemic. Um, and I think my grief of my mom's death gets reopened and revisited at points of anniversaries. Um, Put on top of that, um, the pandemic and the loss or anticipated loss of people we love. And my hunch is that's part of what my grief is, that it's so visible. At other points, it might not be, but I suspect that's part of what it is. And for me, I don't want people to get consumed by my stuff because that's like, ew. Um, that said, each and every one of us has pain. And for those of us who happen to be in leadership roles, if we're not aware of it, then I feel like it comes out sideways. And so that's my part, to be able to say, it's here. And that's my spouse, Susan, is walking by.
Yeah, it's really interesting you should say that, because one of the things that I've been praying about for the reading of Matthew's Passion, you have those lines, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Which many theologians have waxed many things about over the centuries. But one of the things that I believe is going on there is that's from Psalm 22, a completely normal practice of grieving within Judaism, and it's a normal way to lament. And if you were sitting Shiva, if you were doing anything as a good faithful Jew, you would start to lament. And so Jesus begins lamenting, but he doesn't get to finish his lament, and then he dies. And I've always wondered about that unfinished lament, that and what that means for us, the fact that Jesus died, with more lamentation to go. And yeah, and in some ways, when we do actually enter into that lamentation together, there's a sense in which we're finishing that lamentation that Christ began.
No, I think you're right. And I think the profound humanity, that's why I love that there are 4 perspectives with our gospels, but
Yeah.
the profound humanity of Mark and Matthew, particularly for the crucifixion, is what I'm most drawn to.
Yeah. Yeah. There is I'm going to go, let me see if I can pull something just to let you know. Someone just piped in that a prayer for Owen Meany is one of her favorites too. So I see a book club coming along. That's Barbara Prinzi, who's wonderful. And we have, I'm going to continue to move through our questions. These are all good questions, folks, that you're asking. I'm going to kind of move into those as we get along, because the one thing that I know about your story of faith is that you had a kind of radical turn. Even though you grew up in a home where church was part of what you did, you also had this this conversion or transformation in your life. And can you talk about more? When was that, and what happened, and how did it happen, and what happened as a result of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a really profound moment. And this is when I was in Virginia, and a lot of my friends were Baptist, and they would talk about being born again. And I was like, yeah, I'm Catholic. We don't get born again.
You get baptized once.
We get baptized once, and we go to church, and luckily we went to the military base, and the chaplains were super good preachers, so that was really helpful. But I went on a kids Cursillo, a happening, and I went because I lost a bet. My parents had been doing Cursillo, and I thought, frankly, it was a little weird. My
Yeah.
father was hugging guys, and I was just like, whoa. And I was 16, right? And so anyway, I lost this bet. It was a Frisbee game, and I lost it. And so the deal was, if I lost, I had to go on the retreat. So I'm a person of my word. I lost. And so I went on the retreat. And in the course of the retreat, the priest came in and said, how's it going? And I was 16, and I was very much had this sense of, well, it's fine, but I haven't had a mountaintop experience, because for me at 16, I was pretty sure that I deserved a mountaintop experience.
Right. Don't we all? Yes.
Right. And so the priest talked a little bit more, Roman Catholic priest talked a little bit more. And then he said, and then I said something about being afraid of God.
Mm.
And he said, afraid of God. Have you ever said that to God? And excuse me. And I said, well, no, and then I kind of tooted and stuck out my hip. And I was like, no, if God knows everything, why would I have to tell God that, and there was this crucifix across the room, and I looked at it and I prayed. I said silently, I said, I am so afraid of you. And this thing happened. And because I was afraid that if God knew everything I had ever thought of or done, or more to the point said, usually my besetting sin is I get myself in trouble with what I say. I was pretty sure God wouldn't like me. And so I said, I'm so afraid of you. And this thing happened where I felt this warmth start at my toes and go all the way up through my body. And I couldn't stop crying, and I couldn't stop laughing. And I'm pretty sure I blushed for about 45 minutes. And I know I didn't make it up, because I didn't know something like that could happen.
Right. That's great. That's quite beautiful.
And what happened for me in that moment is it really went from being my parents' religion to my faith. And I have to say, on some level, it's kind of a heck of a thing to peak spiritually at 16, because I've not had anything like that happen since. I've come close to it when I was doing the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius.
Yeah.
But it gave me this profound sense of being completely and utterly loved for who I was and who I am. And that is something that I go back to, because I am someone who likes to do. And what I learned in the midst of that is that it's not about what I do, but it's who I am and how I am, and that God completely and utterly loves me.
That is so beautiful. Thank you for saying that, because I'll tell you what interests me, and this is not just curiosity. A lot of people, when they have large spiritual experiences, it's always someplace on the body, and we tend not to actually talk about that connection. And I think for some people, when they pray, it's actually their prefrontal cortex that's firing a little bit better, and they're making better decisions. For other people, they feel God in their toes, and they get jazzed. What is it? When you pray, what part of you becomes electric?
Yeah. I'm pretty kinesthetic and athletic. And as time has gone on, I've gotten more and more attached, surprisingly, to morning prayer and just because I get a big kick out of the Psalms, um, and finding ones in there that really touch my heart. And so I like the rhythm of that, and to make myself just be quiet and sit and listen. And I also really pray when I'm walking, when I'm moving, when I'm in my boat, um, when because if I can be physical, then it feels like it's all of me. So my prayer it's two different ways. One is really sitting with my prayer book Bible, and another is when these, right now, I'm not getting out in my boat, and so right now it's taken my Australian Shepherd out for long walks, um, and putting my silly phone away,
Mm,
and being with her and reveling in creation, looking at all around,
mm.
and taking in the holiness of the world that is so holy that God came into it, which is
That's so beautiful. There's something one of the things that's a little fold and that I find, I identify with this is that I am now one of the stories that I really like about you is that you had an opening at youth minister, you became the youth minister as the rector. And this year we had an opening, and it's not, I have wonderful support. So I have a children's minister and a youth minister, but my area of responsibility is now children and youth. And so that's forcing me to get in touch with both my own early faith life, which had a very similar kind of experience to yours. And I'm spending my time with kids, which is, just so delightfully humiliating and fun, and discovering that. And I'm wondering, when you were the youth minister again, how much did that 16-year-old young woman who saw the cross and felt both the shame and the grace
yeah.
of God, how much did you like access that to like do your ministry?
Well, now, and to be fair, I was not in charge of it.
Okay, same thing. Yeah.
Hillary Waldron, who was 7 years old when I met her, who is 35 now at the congregation I used to pastor. Um, Hillary ran it, and um, Hillary said, it was so lame when you ran it when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You could do a better job than you did. Now, to be fair, Bill, I had 3 kids. I had 3 kids. I was actually doing an okay job, and she's 30, and she's still there. So I kind of feel like I didn't completely blow it.
Yeah.
But what it was wonderful is the kids. Hillary set the rules, and the kids would look to me to see how I was gonna like act out a little bit. And it was the same with our young kids at our church school. Is they'd be like, they once were having an argument, and the teenagers were having a similar argument. They're like, who's in charge? Is Miss Polly in charge, or is Bonnie in charge? So they're like, oh no, Miss Polly's in charge. And then it's like, well, Hillary or Bonnie? They're like, oh, it's Hillary. And I think, not that I was the kids' friends, because I wasn't. I was the kids' priest. But I was the one who would teach them, because we had a section where kids would do homework, and I was one of the ones who would teach the kids how to do a book report on a book you hadn't read.
Mm.
Um, and
That's a trick.
I was like, these are real life skills, kids. Let's work on this. And so it's like, you read the first chapter, you read the last chapter, and you read an obscure chapter in between, and make sure you quote the obscure chapter in between. And then
Right.
we would do goofy things like that. They would periodically say they needed to annotate a book, and so I would go through and write goofy things in it, and the book would get passed down from kid to kid in the family, like, because
That's beautiful.
doing the same. So it was kind of that, but I think it was also for me, what I know is there were priests and teachers who took me completely and utterly seriously. And all I wanted to do with those kids was to take them seriously.
That's beautiful. We have so many good questions for you, but I want to take a little more time just to flesh out who you are as a Christian and who you are as a child of God, as well as our leader, just because from my perspective, this has been, whenever you're in these things, there's a kind of crucible that you're immediately placed in. And, I'm looking forward, and I know that the congregation is looking forward to continuing to get to know you as a whole person. And so to pick up on that a little bit, one of the things you put is, well, I think you've done kayaking a little bit. Even though that was exciting, you and I got into like technical stuff and it got boring. So let's go to mentors, picking up on that. You were saying that you had people who took them seriously because people had taken you seriously, and that was the key. Who were your mentors inside and outside the church?
Yeah. I had a couple of writing teachers in high school, Miss Rose and Mr. Crowley. Both really took my writing seriously and tore it apart. And that was very, very, very helpful, because I knew that they took me seriously enough to say, you could do better. You could, and I really, really valued that. And I think, if I think and then when I get to the Episcopal Church, the first person I worked for as a seminarian was a woman by the name of Lucinda Laird. I don't know if you know her.
Sure. Yes, she's at the cathedral. Yes.
Yeah, she's at the cathedral in
Paris.
So I was her first seminarian, and she became a brand new rector at St. Mark's in Teaneck, New Jersey. And she kind of plotted out how I, as a Roman Catholic, could like, okay, you're going to work here for a year. We'll get a grant to pay for this, and Tracy Lynn can help you do this, and then we'll get you a job, because I think Mark Beckwith is going to be looking for someone to work with him, and so we'll move that along. And then the next thing you know, she was really, Lucinda was really working with me, and then life continued on, and we knew that Richard Schimpfke, who was the rector of Christ Church in Ridgewood, New Jersey, where I was ordained, and he later became the Bishop of El Camino Real. Richard had this vision of what church could be, and I went from a church that was very, very mixed. It was like 50-50 African-American and Anglo. It was very liberal. And then I went to Christ Church Ridgewood, which was much more white, much more conservative. And what I learned with Richard is nothing mattered about people's politics. What mattered was the manner in which they lived out the gospel. And if you set the standard high and invited people to bring their whole selves to something, it was amazing how you could access change with the resources that people brought. And I fact, that is not that dissimilar to Cranbrook.
No, it's exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful, that the last 5 years have been such a time of transformation here. And not because it just happened to kind of catalyze, obviously we had incredible people before that started a major shift in things. Obviously Beth Taylor did incredible work. And obviously, Gary Hall, even though he was here very briefly, did incredible work. But yeah, there's been something about that fullness of the witness here that makes me every day humbled to be the rector.
There's what my time at Christ Church Ridgewood, what it taught me, it always gave me a model for what a church filled with resources and engaged, compelling, strong leaders, lay leaders, what it could look like. And that's what I brought with me to my time at All Saints in Chicago. I had this image of what a church could be. And I continually hearken back to both the diversity that I experienced at St. Mark's in Teaneck, New Jersey, with Lucinda and her ability to preach like you read about it, best preacher I know. And that got into my psyche. And then how Christ Church Ridgewood worked out its life. So that super, super important for me. And then I was at Christ Church Hackensack, where I was Mark Beckwith, who's now the retired Bishop of Newark. I was Mark's first assistant.
Wow.
So and he had this amazing not-for-profit, the Interreligious Fellowship for the Homeless of Bergen County, and I was the volunteer coordinator. And each of those folks taught me how different aspects of ministry that later really came into play with my work at All Saints in Chicago. And I think the other person, Tracy Lind, who's the retired dean of the cathedral in Cleveland, taught me about community organizing and the Industrial Areas Foundation and understanding how we take time to find out what people's passions are, what their gifts and talents are, and stop trying to funnel people into doing the things that church needs them to do, but rather to create ministries around their gifts and talents, because these are the people God has gifted us with. And to try to slot them into something else is to in fact practice idolatry. And so that to me, those are the people who shape me in the church. I'm going to briefly segue to a mentor outside of the church, and that is my friend Roland Wolven, who is a retired Special Forces colonel in the SAS in the UK, and my kayaking mentor. And here's the thing about sea kayaking in advanced tidal waters. You're continually trying to have the large picture. The water can be dangerous. You want to bring people to a place where they can experience that intensity, but also and stretch them, but never go beyond your own limitations, because people's lives literally are at risk. And when someone does come out of a boat, something happens, the first thing you do is stop. And you stop and you assess. You formulate a plan, you execute it, and then you review it. It's called SAFER. Stop, assess, formulate, execute, review, and time again, Bill, and particularly in the midst of this, the beginning of my episcopate, that is played through my mind. In a crisis, how do we lead? How do I lead? How do I call forth leadership in people so that you're not stymieing people, because that takes their agency away?
Right.
But rather calling that forth. But part of that is to have as best as I can, prayerfully, but to have a vision of what's happening, and to know that I don't have it all, so I need other people's perspectives. That's part of the assessing. You figure the plan out, you execute it, and is it working?
That is so rich, and I really thank you for that. And I look forward to getting to know you better. I did some Industrial Areas Foundation work in New York City over 2 different decades, and it's so amazing to see how it has changed as a practice, as well as how, it has those basic insights. So I'm looking forward. I know my congregation well enough. I have 17 questions.
You better get
We better go to them. I love them all. I'm gonna try to. I think I'm trying to boil some of these down. I think we've done an okay. I think we've done an okay job talking a little bit about your past parish, a little bit. We've talked about some of that. The I'm gonna. This is from a new. There's two new parishioners. Beautiful, wonderful people. Jim Trask and John Buell, who's speaking. John is speaking on behalf of his husband, and then Jim is speaking also to LGBTQ issues. And I'm going to just read them both. And you've got to. I know you've got the game. You can handle this. So Jim's question is: we think of ourselves as welcoming to the LGBTQ community, but how can we encourage closer connections and more involvement, particularly with the BTQ people? That's Jim's question. So the bisexual, trans, and queer communities. And then John is asking, Tim and I had the chance to meet Bishop Gene Robinson and learn of the many difficulties he experienced as a gay bishop. Have you had similar experiences?
I'll start with the last one first. Gene Robinson and I were both ordained in the same parish at Christ Church Ridgewood with Richard Chimke. So we were both Richard Chimke's assistants. I think he might have been one of Richard's first, and I was Richard's last. And I have not, because Gene Robinson really took a lot of it on the head.
Yeah.
I have not. I've been at this in a very short time, and but I've not. People have been unfailingly gracious. People have been incredibly welcoming of my spouse, Susan, and I think it speaks to, in many ways, how our world has progressed and changed. And what I am very aware of, I did a lot of work to move us along after Gene Robinson's consecration and all the backlash that happened with that. and did a lot of international work to facilitate some of those changes. But I have not, and I've been blessed. And in terms of bisexual, transgender, queer folks, in many ways, when we're using that language, excuse me, I'm going to cough.
Please. And just so people know who are following along, Bishop has had this cough since like her consecration. This is not a worrying cough at all.
This is the cough I got February 9th after my consecration.
Yeah. And
yes, thank you for saying that. Now, I think when we say bisexual, transgender, queer, in many ways, the folks who say queer, they're either like me and they've gotten tired of the alphabet soup, or they tend to be younger. And also to understand that many folks that everything's kind of gender fluid. And to try to have these narrow categories is to really try to categorize people rather than to understand and to know people. And I think how we become more accepting is to listen. One of the things we did in my previous context at All Saints on November 18th, we had a Trans Day of Remembrance service. Mm-hmm. An enormous number of trans people have been killed, particularly trans people of color, and particularly folks who are trans male to female. um, and the hatred, the fear, the violence against that those children of God is kind of stunning. And so part of what we wanted to do with the Trans Day of Remembrance was to take our liturgy and 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 to honor that loss, and to make it a ministry of our congregation, to, in a way that the Episcopal Church does, to liturgically welcome people, to liturgically honor people, and to liturgically memorialize the pain and sadness. Um,
I'm so grateful you say that, because the last 2 years, we took some steps forward with trans acceptance. We've had members of the congregation who are trans, and we've been blessed by them. And we also had Paula Stone Williams, who is a trans person who is an incredible. She used to run the largest parachurch organization in the Pentecostal world, and truly one of the most brilliant women I know. And she can preach, like she is like. And so I was like, as long as she can preach, I think we're going to be fine, like, and she was unbelievable in her sermon. And then we had Kate Malin, who is in Rye, New York, and she has twin trans daughters, and she's a great preacher. So we had her during this time to have some conversation about it for trans and non-binary people. And my daughter identifies as non-binary, and it is something I think it would be wonderful for us to continue to provide that terrain in that context, in a liturgical context. And it'd be wonderful. I promised you I would not do this, but I would love to have you involved.
I would be absolutely honored and delighted to do that. When I left All Saints, we had I think more than 15 folks who happened to be trans, and it took me, as a lesbian, it took me a chunk of change to understand. I was not fast, and it took me a while to understand, and then I got it. And it made all the difference in the world to me. And how we, and what was so much fun was that people got to be who they were, and they would come, and several people came out in the time of their being at All Saints, and it was lovely. I saw someone said, "What's your definition of resurrection?" There's a resurrection story. That's a resurrection story. Another resurrection story is at General Convention, the Chicago Consultation, this group I started, we were working on supporting trans legislation. But more importantly, we had from congregation in Fayetteville in Arkansas, was their St. Paul's, and one of their families came and told the story during a luncheon. The woman told the story of her trans child, and they were there just telling the story. And I had invited a bunch of people, and some of whom were from Alabama, because I had this ongoing conversation with my friends from Alabama. And off they went. And at convention, when the resolution came up to support everybody regardless, including trans folks, for ordination, this Evan Gardner, who had been fairly conservative in his speaking at General Convention, stood up and he said, "Gardner from Alabama," and you could hear people go, "Mm." And he said, "I was at a luncheon the other day, and I heard the story of a family and their journey with their trans child." And he said, "And this is what I can tell you. I stand in favor of this resolution because I want my church to practice resurrection." I don't think we are ever I don't think we were ever taken away from. I don't think we lose anything when we expand our circle to welcome people. We're not diluted. We are enriched and enlivened. So, and if we listen, then my experience is if I listen, I learn.
That's really, really helpful. And it's we find ourselves to these things in different ways, right? It's not often not of our choosing, and often moments that surprise us. And for for me, it was when you have a child who you love, you have a very different view of things and a different window into things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when I taught at General Seminary, there was a bakery across the street where I did my prep for classes, because I would get lonely in my office. And so it was the entire staff, was gender nonconforming, and all of them had questions that were spiritual, or even relationships with God, because they had to believe in something they could not see about themselves.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to get through some of these questions. These are so great. And I feel like, go ahead.
I'll be back.
No worries. I'm going to just go, and I'm going to start to name some of these. So I'm going to, Jim Trask, I think you've given your question. And John Buell, you've given your question. I think Denise Cruz, you said, what does practicing resurrection mean to you? I think we got that. I'm going to just take that. I think John Keck, you have a question about, do you think the Catholic Church will allow women to be priests and priests to marry? I think we're all going to just take a rest from that question. I love you to death, John Keck, but I just that's another church's business.
Eventually.
Yeah, sooner or later. I think I'm gonna go into a couple of questions that I'll bundle, and one of them is anonymous. What were your first thoughts about serving in the city of Detroit? Which that mean, by good. Thank God they cloaked their identity.
The city of Detroit is one of the reasons that I was very clear that I wanted to be the Bishop of Michigan. And Bill, you've heard me say this, but I mean, I ran for bishop twice before, and then I stopped running for 10 years. And I stopped running because I said, one, I'm not going to do that to my congregation anymore. And two, the only place that I will run again is if Wendell Gibbs ever retires. I will run in Michigan. And I will run in Michigan for several reasons. One, it has a lot of water. And that was another one of the questions, because Lake Huron and Lake Michigan and the Detroit River, I've been paddling and teaching in the Detroit River for 10 years. The company that sponsors, one of the companies that sponsors me is in Wyandotte, and that's where I get my boat. And it's an amazing high-end British boat. But the other piece is I love, the history of Detroit to me is so compelling. And the issue of race, the issue of poverty, the issue of white flight, the issue of the reality of more investment in it now, and that the city is beginning to rise, but the investment is happening in Midtown and downtown. And where is it happening in the neighborhoods? And that gap between them, and what is the role of the church in that, and how do we marshal our resources between places like Bloomfield Hills and Cranbrook and Birmingham and Detroit and Pontiac, and we have people of faith in all of those places, and how do we marshal those resources, that power, that Christian longing for something more? How do we enact it? And for me, that seemed so compelling, to be able to work with that, and then couple in the literally kind of rural aspects of this diocese. That to me sounded so compelling and so challenging
Mm.
that, so for me, I looked at Detroit and I thought, all right, what can I learn? And what is it we might be able to do? But first and foremost, how do I listen? What can I learn?
That's so beautiful. I thank you so much for doing it. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I tend to like grunt or anytime I go, it just pops over to me. So I apologize for that. I'll try to control myself. That there's another follow-up to that, that, that when you say listen and learn, and this is, I'm not sure. I want to make sure that you understand that our job tonight is really to sit back and just see the whole person. I was, my deepest hope for this is this would actually be a refreshing moment for you, and not a moment where you feel like you have to like, chart out your first 100 days as a president, kind of thing.
My first time has been fairly entertaining, let me tell you.
Yes. So what does excite you? It's kind of being in those contradictions. Is that what you're saying? Being in the contradictions is what gets you excited?
I think being in the gap and trying to figure out how to bridge the chasms.
Hmm.
I think of Christianity, and I saw something there. Someone was asking the question about the world is holy. Is that why God came into it? And I think Christianity is about being in this world, and that, and honoring this world, and not saying it's about the next. That Jesus came into this world, and I think Christianity at its best is about living our life and following Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in such a way that we bridge the chasms of sin in our world, and how we reckon that, and name it and own it, and then how do we address it? And I think that's what Christianity calls us to do in this world now.
That is so spot on, and that's such a beautiful way of looking at it. I appreciate that. I'm that is so profound that I'm gonna throw some less profound things, and then we'll go back to it because we're all gonna like let that sink into our heads. So some really important questions: which is better, the Atlantic or the Pacific to paddle in?
I've not spent near as much time paddling in the Pacific. I surfed in Hawaii as a kid, so that is where my profound love of all things waves come from, and my kind of intuitive understanding of them. So paddling the Pacific on the West Coast, whoa, that's, you get 19-second periods there. I mean, so between, I'm getting geeky, between the top of a wave to another top of a wave, 19 seconds. It means it's a massive wave that has come from very far away. That's a lot of energy to pummel a boat. So I've had far less experience in the Pacific. I'm also cautious. The Atlantic, that said, can also be quite something. I've spent more time there, and I have a deep abiding love of the United Kingdom for its paddling, because of the nooks and crannies that cause the tides, and how the tides have to go around it, which make for tide races, which you were talking about, which makes for white water on the ocean. And you get far more tide races in the UK, in the Atlantic, than you get in the Pacific.
That is cool. Yes. I mean, we could go too far into this because yes, that is cool. I like that. That's exciting.
Wait, but I have paddled out to the island where Christianity came into Scotland.
So Iona.
No. It came into Elac Nome and then went to Iona.
Very cool.
And it's all in the same neighborhood, but Elac Nome is actually where Columba would go to get when he got overrun by everybody in Iona.
Yeah.
St. Columba's mother is buried in Elac-Nome.
Yeah, he had quite an episcopate. I mean, where occasionally he had to kind of just like flee. Just I like that idea. I mean, but I mean, theoretically, like if someone else having it, right? But another question, just pop it. We're just like, what's the Chicago consultation doing now? That
It's not doing much. It's not doing much right now. We, in many ways, we met all of our goals, or at least many of them. So right now it's not doing much.
And then we have a couple of excitedness. This is like, I just think these are like little, like, yay, Bishop. Hi, Bishop, I'm Catholic and Episcopalian, and find the balance God-given in a mystery as well. So he finds the balance between being both Catholic and Episcopalian. It's dual citizenship, loves it. Another is from our senior warden, who says, right on point about letting people be their best selves, rising to what God calls them to be, liberal, conservative aside. So he liked that, thumbs up. And then you did mention, you answered John Keck's wonderful question about the world is so holy that God came into it. So we're just knocking these down. And then another little some fan stuff. This is from Denise Cruz, who's wonderful in our healing prayer ministry. Thank you for your time and sharing so much of yourself. You seem to be a warm, genuine, spiritually connecting person, sending virtual hugs with little prayer hands. Okay, that is amazing. I've already quoted this senior warden. He won't be upset. He wanted some, nuts and bolts, which I think we've been covering that. That was way back at 734. We've got and then we have a couple of questions about how you were called to your first parish and what that was like for you. That seems to be moving a little deeper as to how did you find, because the people you mentioned, people who are, in my mind, are some of the most profound leaders in the church, and they weren't the people that had like the headlines so much. Like Tracy Lind, in my opinion, is truly one of the most brilliant pastors and I wish even though she has shared a lot and done a lot, I don't think we've gotten everything out of her that she could share about how to lead a congregation. And so you had great sense of who could do this kind of stuff, but you picked a small parish and you stayed for a long time, particularly for someone who, like, if Lucinda Laird is like telling you about your career, I mean, my God, you must have had like a million people say to you, like, okay, you've been here 10 years. I mean, they can't ask you to stay any longer, right? So why did you go? Why did you stay?
Yeah. So, well, and for one thing, it wasn't my first parish. It was my fourth.
Yeah.
So that's the funny part. But I stayed because it continued to be incredibly compelling and it kept growing. I mean, we started with 30 on a Sunday, and when I left, our high Sundays were 700. And we were doing regularly, a normal Sunday would be 270, 280. And we had a huge community kitchen and food pantry, our not-for-profit, where we served 250 of our guests every Tuesday night, 125 family style sit-down meal and groceries, and then another 150, 180 groceries. So it was it had a lot of different things going. It had incredible lay leaders, just folks who got it and who could come up with these amazing ideas. And I was like, great, go find 4 people, come back and then we can make this thing go. So it was continually challenging me. And I confess, I was in a couple of searches at various points. And, I ran for bishop a couple of times and then stopped, but I was in a couple of cathedral searches or super big churches in New York searches, and would not get called, I think mostly because I think I'm supposed to be here. But I don't think I don't think they felt like I fit quite their mold.
Yeah.
And what I loved about All Saints is the mold kept changing and shifting, and I kept being able to grow. And there was never this presumed, this is how it has to be. It was like, okay, now we've done it this, and how are we going to think about that? Well, let's keep working on that. And every year for Holy Week, we had 14 services in Holy Week, and a huge group of people who would put them on, and various people from the staff would staff them, but everybody else was creating these services, and be like, okay, well, we've really got Monday, Thursday wrapped up, so we don't have to work on that this year, but let's rework Good Friday, let's rework the Easter Vigil, and it was just compelling with super fun, smart, engaged people who I was like, okay, well, let's look at race. What are we going to do about that? And how are we going to address that? And how are we going to address the inequities in our city? And what are we doing with gun violence? And this was all stuff people came and brought to me.
It's so interesting you should say that, because some advice that I got, the two things that you're saying to me that I think are really important about what you bring to the calling that you have now is I do think you break the mold in many ways. I think you break the mold by being incredibly transparent and direct, and sometimes, and this is not a comment about the previous bishop, this is just a comment about bishops in general. They often hide behind the role so much that you can never really actually get to the real person, because they're and probably maybe that's part of it is just self-protection. I don't want to I'm not trying to complain, but you have a completely different kinetic style to leadership than most bishops. And then the second thing I see, and this is something that Andy Doyle said to me, who is my best friend from seminary, and of course he's far more successful. I mean, just wonderful, runs a huge, church, diocese. But he said to me once when I was calling him for some phone therapy, he said, the rectors that are worth their weight in gold are the ones whose personalities change as they are in the position. So is that both of those things seem to get what you're trying to say? Is that fair?
No, I think so. I mean, I don't think I can comment on how bishops are or how I am as one. I've been doing it 5 weeks. I mean, since November, but 5 weeks. So we'll see, right? Who knows? But I think an amazing rector is someone who is completely committed to continually growing. I think you're right on that. I think is someone who's committed to being prayerful, is someone who is committed to having a high intellectual humility, meaning that that they can't think they know it, because this is the thing that gets people out in the wilderness in trouble, is that, I know what this is. I've done this before. And then they just lead out of their past instead of what they're seeing now and what the future is. And so there has to be this intellectual humility to continually be open to what can I learn now? What is this teaching me now? If you think about the guy who landed the airplane on the Hudson River.
Shelley, yes.
Right, and so his Scully,
sorry, yeah.
And his whole motto, the stuff I've read about him, is that every single flight he would say to himself, this is all going to be different. What am I going to learn now? What am I going to learn this time? And so for me, I think a good rector, one, you stay as long as you have something to learn and you have something to give. When one of those shifts, it's time to leave. But I think many of us leave too soon. I don't think people ought to stay 27 years. That's kind of absurd. And I did, and it worked and it was great. But I don't think that's the deal. But I do think people need to be able to reinvent themselves at least once. And I think that's over a 14-year period. And I think the 7-year itch is real. And I think if we can reinvent ourselves at least once, then we have the ability to learn from our folks and to take a congregation to real transformation. I mean, that's what the literature says. And so that's one of the things that I look for folks is, one, the ability to be steadfast. It's kind of Benedictine, right? That you're steadfast and that you're always kind of discerning and listening for God. Yeah, so what can I learn and how do I stay? And probably they should be in therapy. I've spent most of my life in therapy. Maybe that's just because I'm weird, right? But
Oh, no.
oh no, to be fair, I am. But I think to have a commitment to working on ourselves both spiritually but emotionally is super important.
Well, check on every box, Bishop. So I've got you. It's 8:23 and I want to move back to the challenging. And so I'm getting rid of the questions around we're going to hear more about your experience, obviously, in Chicago. There's a couple here that have come up. I'm going to go the one that I'm going to focus on. There's two that have talked a bit about the current pandemic, and one question comes from Barry Lawler, and he has just came back from Florida, and he's a little bit upset about the fact that we can't get Eucharist in a more in a safe way, and we worked through that a little bit. We're feasting on the Word this time. Another is from Hunter Torres, and I'm going to just read her because I think this is a really powerful question. And it picks up on what Leslie McNamara, another former senior warden and wonderful therapist, has written. At some point this evening, among all the prayers you may lead us in, would you please include the souls, many unknown, who have had to die alone in the midst of this pandemic, and the grieving families and friends, especially Cliff, of those who've recently died due to C-19, and the adult children, especially Tim, who yearn but cannot be with their quarantine aging parents, and the individuals, especially Megan, who are sick and awaiting test results, and the children who may not understand what is happening but sense the anxiety and distress in their world. Thank you for being with us tonight and sharing your beautiful self with such gracious intimacy and love. And that is a prayer that we'll offer in probably in about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But one of the things is it's such an unfair thing to say, but I trust that you'll. One of the questions that a lot of spirituality asks us to do, a lot of ethics asks us to do, is like, what is God doing? And I'm wondering if you had any inkling, and no one is going to hold you to this answer. But as we're going through this incredible trauma and this pain and this experience, can you speak a little bit about that?
And again, I've had the cough forever. I don't know. I don't know what God's doing. I know that God in the person of Jesus is weeping. I think just simply Cliff and Tim and Megan is just proof enough. And this is part of what I said on my sermon this past week, is that I didn't really rush to the Lazarus part, um, uh, because I'm not seeing anybody being pulled out of the tomb right now. Um, I stayed with Jesus weeping because I think that's what Jesus is doing. Are there good things coming out of this? Probably. You know, are we seeing amazing aspects of people's humanity? Yes, we are. Are we seeing people come together in a polarized nation? In some places, absolutely. And so amazing gifts. Are we watching heroes, absolute heroes in our people who work at the grocery store, our people who work in the pharmacy, our physicians, our nurses, the transport people, the respiratory therapists, the LPNs, the nurses' aides, all of those folks, amazing. So I think that's all happening. And so we're seeing really goodness, and I can see the holy in that, and I can see God at work at that. What theologically, what am I to learn from this pandemic? And where is God in that? I think God is I think God is on the cross. And I think Jesus is saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think if Jesus can say it, so can we.
That's a beautiful thing. And, you know, I do funny things with art. And one painting I blew up, it's from Titian that he did in 1575, 76. He was in Venice, and he was dying of the plague. The plague had come to Venice, and he did this picture that's at his graveside. And what's amazing to me, and I don't think you recognize this, when I saw this in Venice years ago, this is the Pietà.
You say it looks like the Pieta.
Yeah, and Jesus is actually a plague victim. There's no wounds, but the pallor of his skin is clearly a marking of bubonic plague. And this is Titian praying to Jesus, who has borne our diseases. And what's funny is not a lot of art historians miss that until you don't see that message in it until you actually are in a pandemic, you know, and then it comes alive, because that's what he's finding a Christ who is bearing our disease. We should, on that note, I know there's some other things that you all have asked. I want to thank all of you. There are other questions, but I think we should probably move towards prayer, if that's okay with you, unless you want to, is there anything you want to say before we move to prayer?
Yeah. There's Pam Bingham has a question.
Yeah.
Facing financial challenges for the future, and what should we be doing? One of the things I was asking our staff to look at today is to find what monies we have that we could use as a matching grant, a match. I would love to see the Diocese of Michigan lay out with the using diocesan funds matching up to $25,000. I would love to see us put together $50,000 and make a significant medical supply purchase. I don't know exactly what it would be, but part of what we were looking at today is, yeah, I'm worried about our future of our institution and our congregations, but first and foremost, I am concerned about the people who are dying and the people who are risking their lives to save them. And what I want us to do more than anything is I want us to make a significant financial chunk in that to buy. I mean, I don't know, $50,000, it buys a lot of masks. $50,000 buys a lot of protection, PPE. I don't think it buys that many ventilators, but it could buy a chunk. And I just wonder, like, what if we did do that in the midst of us worried about ourselves, but that first and foremost, we need to worry about something else. And it is not the institution's viability, it is the life and breath, literally, of our sisters and brothers.
Well, we're going to match you. So why don't we make it a $50,000 matching grant? We'll give you $25,000.
Okay. So, and then we match up to 50, and then we make a real difference, because this is what.
Well, actually, no, if we say 50 matching, we'll make 100.
Exactly. So, right. But thank you, because this is what I am thinking is, this is how we say that we are not, we're worried about ourselves, but oh, for heaven's sakes, let's live it. Let's make the difference. Let's lead in saying, this is how we use our gifts from all corners of our diocese to make a difference, because Michigan is fast on its way to becoming the epicenter.
Yeah, no, it is. And I just want to say to my parish leadership, the vestry, my wardens, of course, I need your help on that too. And I apologize for just jumping in there, but I know you're behind me. And
well, they might be behind you.
Yes, let's just hope. But I believe they are. I believe they are, because this that's when the Flint water crisis happened, we had Presiding Bishop Curry was coming to visit the parish, and we raised in 3 weeks' time $30,000, and we funneled it through the Presiding Bishop's fund for world relief. And stepped into a gap, because they were trying to change and shift funds to Flint. And that was one of the most rewarding things that we've done as a congregation. And I know that we could find a way to make that happen as well, because I think, the thing with matching gifts, and this is not to show our cards with fundraising, but if you say you'll match up to 50, you almost always will raise a lot more, and that will be a really important thing.
Yep.
So, and that would be a wonderful way for us to support you in your first few days, and doing the great leadership you are. We should end with a prayer. And the one thing, last night we were interviewing some people. I was with a group of because of this capital project that we're still planning. And I just asked people to name if they had anybody that was touched by this disease. And it was about 6 of us, and at least 4 people, 1 person had passed away, and 3 people were sick. So folks, if you can just type some names into your chat of people you're praying for. So I'm praying for Rebecca, and I'm praying for DJ, and I'm praying for a few others that I have written over here that have called me today to let me know. And if you could just type right over here in the chat area, and we'll just see, we'll start to do that. And then if that's okay, if Bishop, you could just open us in prayer, and we can just, and Mike Davis, who's a parishioner, who's we just heard. If we could, and Karen, DJ, Mike, Marilyn, and Larry, if you open us in prayer, and then we'll just go through, and then we'll also pray for the doctors and things like that.
Yeah. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Ever living God, in the midst of disease and sadness and death, we need you. We long for you. We need to feel your healing presence. And in this night, we remember all of the folks who have died, who we don't know, and they have perished. And regardless of what we believe happens afterwards, their leaving this life is a loss that is hard to reckon. We remember all of those who are not able to be with their aging families. And we remember the folks who are desperately, desperately hoping to be well. We remember Sue and Carolyn and Mike Davis and Megan and Laura and Akram, for all of our doctors, for our nurses, for our LPNs, for our CNAs, for our respiratory therapists, for the folks who are transporting, for the people who are taking folks in their taxi cabs to the field, to the old state fair field to be tested, folks who are risking doing that, for the people in our grocery stores who are working, for the Berg family, oh my goodness, who have lost both their parents, George, for Blaine, for Stephen and Heather Bollinger, for Pam and Natalie, for Danny, for Bart and Eddie, for all the folks who are vulnerable and elderly, our loved ones, the ones we've never met, for Jerry and Colleen, who are a couple with COVID, for Rebecca and David, for Tim's dad, for Manny and Elizabeth, for Michelle, for all of the children and how they deal with the anxiety that is floating in our air, for the children who don't have enough food, for our folks who are living on the streets who don't have access to enough food and are at such risk, for Michelle, for the people who are on the cruise ship that is being denied entry to this country. For the people in our detention camps, been separated from their families. For all of us who are scared to death and scared of death and scared of illness. For all of us, gracious God, that we might feel your healing, holy presence, and that we may use what we have to make a difference. And that, gracious God, we may, and it's going to take a while, but that we may have the steadfastness to stay home. To wash our hands and to pray. And for those who may die this night alone, tomorrow or the next day. In your blessed, holy name, we now pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. I should note that Father Chris Harris has been here as well. And then Marcel Amin-Ra, who might be related to the Amin-Ra, Chi Amin-Ra, which is one of my dear friends. We are so grateful to have so many of you with us tonight, folks. You guys are been wonderful to have you all here. I want to also thank Bishop Perry for just being so incredibly open and transparent and lovely and willing to be vulnerable, willing to be such an incredible leader to us at this time. We are so blessed to have you with us tonight, and we know that you are being pulled in many directions. So thank you for the generosity of your time, and we look forward to we'll follow up tomorrow with the things that we just discussed.
Thank you. And do you know, on Sunday at 7, I'm going to host for our diocese a call. I've got Meredith Hill, who is the director of the emergency department out at Sparrow Hospital out in Lansing, parishioner at St. Clair's, and I'm forgetting Abram's last name, also a parishioner at St. Clair's, and he's an epidemiologist.
Beautiful.
So I'm gonna host a conversation for our diocese writ large, and it's COVID-19, a a scientific and pastoral conversation.
That's beautiful. And for those of you also listening, we've got a follow-up on our psychology of pandemics, which was great. We should maybe put together like a web page where we put these things up, because I've got John Barry is going to be coming in April 15th, and he's going to be wonderful. And we're going to match him with an epidemiologist from Wayne State named Paul Kilgare. And so please, folks, just continue to follow our social media. Make sure you get on our feeds. Make sure you get our emails. If you have any questions, you can see them we're going to be sending you emails because many of you registered. So just keep following us. And thank you, Bishop Perry. Again, we look forward to seeing you 7 o'clock on Sunday.
All right. All right. Take care. Thank you, guys. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.
Wash your hands.
Yes.